Okay, so I'm going to just give you a little bit of a review here. And uh, if you study for the exam, don't use just this review. I may do some more. We'll talk about them in class. So just kind of an overview of the two, really the two, what I feel is one of the most important, the two most important things we discussed, which was the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment. So when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, what we're really talking about is a, a period in the 1500s in Western Europe in which the Catholic Church, being the dominant religious institution in Western Europe, lost its monopoly on power. Mainly, any institution, we talked about that before, any institution in society is going to have issues if they're the only ones. All right, so if they're the only ones, all right, that's it. They're going to probably become corrupt. Now, that's whether it's a religious institution, whether it's the government, or whatever. And so sometimes it's better to just kind of have different institutions, in order to share power. Now, the Catholic Church was corrupt in many ways, but the thing that really set the Protestant Reformation off was the sale of indulgences. Okay, so indulgence was simply someone can buy an indulgence, which meant that they would shorten their time in purgatory. All right, so the Catholic Church, you believe in there's heaven and there's hell. We're here, let's say, and so purgatory is this sort of period of time, kind of before you go to heaven. And let's say, for example, you um, die with sin on your soul, but it's not the kind of sin that you would end up in hell for. All right, so you go to purgatory for a while, and then eventually you go to heaven. And so this is, a little bit different than I mean, they still have the doctrine of purgatory in the Catholic Church, but this doctrine of indulgence has changed quite a bit. And so if back then you can sell an indulgence, which meant simply that you or a loved one, especially a loved one that you felt was in purgatory, it could shorten their time there. And of course, they would prey on which group of people? Mainly the poor. The poor. Now, Martin Luther went to Rome and saw firsthand the corruption of the church. And eventually, when he got back, he said, we need to get back to the original teachings of Christianity. And he came up with four doctrines of faith that, at least at that time, um, differentiated Protestantism from Catholicism: predestination, faith alone, scripture alone, and the priesthood of all believers. And we discussed all these a few times in class, and next week we'll talk about them again. Now, he wanted to get this guy, this indulgence salesman, a guy by the name of Johann Tetzel, out of his parish. All right, the bishop was getting money underneath the table from this indulgent salesman, Johann Tetzel. So Luther in 1517, this is kind of a famous event, nailed the 95 Theses on the church door. On the church door. Bam, bam, bam. And this spread because of Gutenberg's invention in the 1400s of the printing press. And what we started to see is people in what today is Germany, some princes started moving towards the Lutheran religion, and everybody in that area, this prince's domain, had to convert to Lutheranism, to the point that there was even a war. But one of the things that, I guess I want you to remember about all of this, and again, I'm not going to go over everything that we went over. This is just a quick review. We're going to review some more next week. But one of the things that I want you to understand is that the Protestant Reformation uh, broke the monopoly that the Catholic Church had on um, religion. All right, it was a major, it's a very powerful institution in Western Europe, and and many historians argue, and this is one of the reasons that we talk about it, among others, is that the Protestant Reformation had a great impact on sort of this resurgence of democracy, all right, in Western Europe, and kind of a rebirth. And it had been years since there was any kind of idea of democracy. And one of the reasons is because of this doctrine here, the priesthood of all believers. All right, the priesthood of all believers, because the idea is that everyone was what? Equal. Everyone was equal. We take that for granted today, but nonetheless, that was a big deal back then. We talked about the old regime, how people were, you were just kind of born into a particular caste. Okay, so you might have been born a peasant, or you might have been born as part of the nobility. All right, so it didn't, it didn't matter what you did. That's just the way it was. You couldn't really move up. However, with this idea of a priesthood of all believers, this idea of equality, all right, this idea of equality, what that meant is that when people got together in a church, then they would end up choosing their leader. So this was not a big jump, all right, from kind of religious democracy to political democracy. It's very important because today we have a representative democracy, we have political democracy. Now, some argue that there was a connection between the Protestant Reformation and capitalism. Explain. Well, many people argue, and this theory here between the Protestant Reformation and democracy is pretty, most people agree with that. Most historians think that there's definitely a connection there, but this not so much. Some people argue this, some people argue against this, but when we think of capitalism, and it's our economic system that we use, not pure capitalism, but we live in a capitalist country, we have a capitalist economic system, a free market system for the most part. And this was something that kind of emerged after the Protestant Reformation, kind of what we consider maybe modern day capitalism or contemporary capitalism. And some people argue that the Protestant Reformation spurred this along, all right, kind of pushed it along. And what I mean, or what they mean by that, is that capitalism may have developed on its own, but when it sort of spurred it, it means it kind of made it go faster. The development went faster. Now we don't know; these things are kind of hard to figure out, hard to measure. But it was a guy by the name of Max Weber who theorized this in the early 1900s. And basically, what he said was the doctrine of predestination eventually kind of evolved into a sort of a cultural. It evolved into something that became very intertwined in the mindset of people, in the culture of people. And what it basically did was make people sort of more materialistic because how did you know you were going to go to heaven? Well, there was this idea that if you had material possessions on earth, that would allow you, that was a sign that you were going to go to heaven. And so this is what kind of made people work a lot harder than they really had to. And some people argue that this was needed to spur along capitalism. That's a little bit so-so, like I said. Not everybody agrees with that. But nonetheless, it's good to know. Now, another thing that we talked about is the Enlightenment. And what I want you to realize about the Enlightenment is that people used reason. People used reason and rationalism. So this is not like, an example of not being rational is when you watch a football game and you arrange your furniture in a certain way because you think it's going to help the team. This is not rational. Okay, but the Enlightenment, there was this kind of very optimistic movement that somehow using reason we can create almost a utopia. And go ahead and read that. In the wake of Newton's discoveries, there was a massive effort to uncover the natural laws believed to govern human affairs, such as politics, economics, law, architecture, literature. Now, if, as Newton's work seemed to show, a rational God had created a universe which ran according to mathematical laws, would not God have formulated laws governing human affairs as well? This is the basis for many, pretty much one can argue, much of our society today, this kind of belief system that there was a way that somehow they could sort of manipulate politics and manipulate the economy, that they could sort of discover laws within those things to create really almost a perfect place. Now, we know we can't do that today, but that's how they kind of thought at that time. And it still has a huge influence on the way we think today. Would God not have established laws governing politics and economics? Now, religion, um, the Enlightenment thinkers were mainly deist, which simply meant that they believed in God, but they didn't think God got involved in the going-ons of everyday living. In politics, we start with Hobbes and Leviathan, and he, of course, talked about the social contract of people, all right, that basically left alone in a state of nature without any form of government, when men would kill each other for wealth and power, and you just basically have chaos. And so people created a government to maintain order, but then of course they would have to be obedient to the government. This was the social contract that Hobbes described, and he said that the best form of government was what? An absolute monarchy. Now, John Locke, heavily influenced by Hobbes, expanded that and said that the purpose of the social contract and what the function of government was to protect life, liberty, and property, and that when a government, back then the king, threatened these, he violated the social contract, and people had the right, not only the right, but the duty to change it. John Locke talked about the essay on human understanding, or tabula rasa, blank slate, that basically, if we have just, say we're born, and this is us, all right, and if we grow up here in South Louisiana, we may go squirrel hunting, we may eat gumbo, right? We celebrate Mardi Gras, all these things, because that's who we are. That's we grew up here. Now, if we grew up in, so basically our environment, makes, us who we are. Okay, it sort of draws on this tablet. Lane, for example, that's me. My environment, my surroundings become who I am, or make me who I am. Whereas if I had been born in sub-Saharan Africa, I'd be a different person speaking a different language. Okay, even though I might be me. And so, making, our environment sort of draws on this blank tablet and makes us who we are. That's tabula rasa. That was, kind of went against this doctrine of predestination, for example. Economics, Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, actually in 1776, and he said that in The Wealth of Nations, the best thing that a nation can do to acquire wealth was what? That's exactly right. Very good. All right. The best thing to do is to leave the economy alone. This is known as laissez-faire economics. Leave the economy alone. The governments get out of it. You'll create the most wealth. This kind of went against mercantilism, where you had a situation in which the government was involved in the economy. And we talked about Jeremy Bentham and utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? Basically the greatest good for the greatest number, and anytime a government decides what a law should be, they should think in terms of that. What creates the greatest good for the greatest number? The French Enlightenment. Of course, we talked about Voltaire. One of the things you need to know for the test is that he wrote Candide, a satire in which he attacked everything, all right? The church, the monarchy, just pretty much everybody. He attacked war, for example. He attacked the Catholic Church. He attacked censorship. And so this is one of these kind of Enlightenment ideas. Okay, I'm not sure if Voltaire wrote this or said this, but it certainly kind of captures his thoughts as well as Diderot's thoughts. Though I disagree with what you say, I will defend to my death your right to say it. And so this really kind of captured their ideas on those things. And this is not easy to do. Think about somebody that you vehemently disagree with. Would you defend to your death their right to say it? Diderot once said, man will not be free until the last king has been strangled with the entrails of the last priest. And so, it kind of gives you an idea of what he was thinking, what he thought about the two dominant institutions in France at that time, which was absolute monarchy and the church. Montesquieu, extremely important. He wrote L'Esprit des Lois, and he talked about the separation of powers, which had influence on our founding fathers. Today, we see that in our own government with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And that is just a little quick review. We're going to review some more. I posted those I posted some of the PowerPoints on the Joule site. And like I said, I just kind of went over this very quickly, but I want y'all to make sure you study your notes, and you can go back to some of the lectures, you can go back to this, and maybe that'll help, and we'll actually start reviewing Monday.